Alvin, that's a really interesting point that you're making around sort of the capital and the investment piece and highlighting the innovation. Can we dive in a little bit more kind of now on the ground? Obviously, you're head of APAC for Puro.earth, and so your focus is in this region. A lot of innovation going on there.
Yes.
But also you're familiar with the broader ecosystem that's thriving now globally. Can you give me a kind of an overview? Let's begin at APAC, and then let's look at other regions and specifically what is happening in the world of CDR in LATAM and in Africa and in North America and Europe, et cetera. Can we go there?
Sure, happy to do that. So maybe let's start with Asia Pacific.
Yeah, let's start with APAC.
So for our company within APAC, our initial or primary focus is trying to find project developers, project proponents.
Okay.
So people who have either engineering know-how or a scientific concept that will remove carbon, and they're looking to implement it. Okay. So we want to find those kind of people, work with them to confirm what they're doing, measure it. And once there's that measurability and can be audited, then there's a successful issuance of carbon removal credits. Or in our space, we call them CORCs.
CORCs.
Yeah.
Great.
So we're always on the lookout for projects that can come to market and produce gradually, and then eventually at scale.
Okay, and that CORC stands for Carbon Offset Removal Certificate.
CO2 Removal Certificate.
CO2 Removal Certificate. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, there's lots of different acronyms, so I'm just trying to...
Yeah, so for ours, it's CORC.
Great.
And initially in this region, the early movers were in Australia. So a number of things going there, access to waste biomass to do CDRs such as Biochar production, also biomass burial, and also...
and that's reestablishing carbon into soil, essentially, right?
Yeah.
For agricultural purposes,
that's
part of the carbon cycle. Are there any other use cases for biochar?
So biochar definitely removes carbon for hundreds of years, possibly longer, depending on how you store it.
Yep.
But also it has co-benefits for the soil. So when you put it in the soil, it's good for farming. So it traps water. It also can be synergistic with microbes in the soil or cultivate them, fertilizer, et cetera, all to increase yield. So it has numerous benefits in that sense.
So that's good. So that's like input costs as well as essentially sequestering the carbon. That's fantastic.
Yep.
Good.
So you have that. Australia also has a lot of land, and some of it is barren. So you can do certain kinds of techniques, such as biomass burial. So that's something that we're working with people there, such as Inter-Earth. Then we have...
So that's essentially locking up carbon from waste materials in biological, organic waste materials.
Locking up woody waste biomass or non-commercially useful biomass, and you keep cultivating that, and you store it in such a way that there's no methane leakage.
Okay, great.
Broadly speaking.
Because that's the other component, right? If it's just sitting and rotting on a field, effectively you've got the anaerobic digestion and you've got methane leaking, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Great.
And so those were some of the initial projects in Australia, but there's lots of other potential there, such as Aircapture. So Aircapture uses a lot of energy, so if you can get renewable energy to drive that, that's of course a plus. And so there are projects, for example, looking at solar power to power those processes. Aspera DAC being one of those. Okay. So that's what we started with in Australia.
So these are terrestrial solutions.
These are terrestrial for now. Yes, there's a big focus on can you harness the ocean.
Sure, because that's a natural biosync as well.
That's research stage. We haven't approved yet any methodologies for that. But as you know, there's a lot of focus globally on how to get that measurable and then implement. Yeah. So that's work in progress.
That's awesome.
Then elsewhere in Asia Pacific, we now have biochar production in the Philippines. So there's a company called Alcom here in Singapore.
Great.
Sponsored a project working with rice mills in Philippines.
Oh, wow, great.
Using waste material, and instead of burning it, now converting it to biochar. And
so rice husks and these types of materials. Fantastic.
So that's one example, but we'd see a lot more examples of that possible in the rest of Southeast Asia. We're seeing some pilots happening in Korea, Japan, China as well. So that's promising.
Great.
And then in India, you might have seen recently there was an enhanced rock weathering project called Bio'char, which Frontier selected them in the third round. So that's one of our newer methods, which is leveraging natural mineralization processes, but accelerating that.
And so on that perspective, just to pause here, because that's really fascinating, you were talking about earlier around the time scale. We have this issue or this concept of permanence in carbon markets, which is one of the core tenets or core carbon principles. Yes. Enhanced rock weathering, biochar, they're on a different time scale to some of the other solutions. When we look at avoidance, obviously that's the displacement. So there's arguably the argument there is that that's permanent by design. But when we're looking at the sequestration component, whether it's nature-based or tech-based, now we're looking at timescales. So can you unpack that on the enhanced rock weathering? Because it's geological timescale, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's right. So when we talk about these projects, again, all of which are doable in Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
So the most permanent ones are the ones where you either, or viewed to be most permanent, or you somehow get CO2 from the atmosphere back underground.
Right.
And back underground means it has to be in a geological feature where it won't escape.
Okay.
And so assuming you can get it back down there properly, it's meant to be thousands of years plus.
Okay.
So very long horizon.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you can get CO2 to react with minerals, and that is what enhanced rock weathering is an example of.
Sure.
Then that's extremely permanent and durable.
Yeah.
And again, we
Effectively,
label it as 1,000 years
You're
plus.
locking up the essentially the gas, which in this case is CO2, and then ultimately locking down as limestone, essentially, right? Calcium carbonate.
Yep, it'll react with calcium
Yep.
or magnesium oxides, hydroxides, and form a new rock. You can think of it that way.
Yeah, great.
So highly durable.
Great.
Now, biochar is a bit different. You're taking carbon that's been trapped by plants, and now you try to convert its structure to be much more durable. So the end result is kind of what it sounds like. It looks like a
just
lump
making
of
it
char.
carboniferous. Essentially, you're accelerating what would happen normally over millennia, and you're essentially taking out all the water in that biomass, and then effectively locking it up as charcoal.
Yes. So when you do that, it changes its structure. You put it in the ground, and it will stay there a long, long time.
Yeah, of course.
However, the science community is still debating how durable that is.
Sure.
We label it as 100 years plus because all the evidence would point to the fact that that's quite clear. Some people will say that, well, under certain conditions, whether it's temperature or depth, or put it into concrete, you can extend its life. So we can see how that could be the case, and there'll be more research on that.
Yeah,
But that's the spectrum of durability that you're talking about.
But that's okay, right?
Yes.
I think a lot of folks get very vitriolic in their views around seeking perfection, right? There's this common theme that's ongoing now. We're sort of diverging here, and indulge me if you will, around the perfect being the enemy of the good. There's a lot of folks that sit on the sidelines that don't necessarily provide solutions, but they're saying ultimately it's a binary outcome. An offset is either perfect or it's not an offset. And I don't believe that to be the case. To just take on what you just said, it's quality is a spectrum, and we're driving towards high quality constantly. That's the search for integrity. And the argument around permanence is important. I don't want to denigrate the scientific community. I'm a biochemist by training. But I think it misses the point when it's used as a weapon. It's important to make sure that we have long-term and permanent solutions to decarbonize, especially on the removal side.
Right.
But whether it's 100 years or if it's 1,000 years, why can't the price be the determining factor for that? And why can't we just focus on scaling? Because you identified it earlier. I mean, we could talk about this and create the most perfect solution for a market, and then it maintains a niche status in 20 years' time, and we have done one thing, and that's fail. Would you agree?
I agree with that. So yes, we need to build a market. We can see the direction of travel.
Yeah.
Will it move perfectly straight line? I doubt it.
I doubt it too.
Nothing ever does.
Nothing ever does.
But if we're pointing in the right directions, that's a good. That's a good thing.
That's our North Star, essentially,
Yes.
right? Quality is our North Star.
Yeah, and if there's dialogue and challenge in a productive way within the market, fine. I mean, that's how things evolve.
That's exactly
But yes, if something is aimed at purely trying to destroy and halt, that's going to be a problem. So we have to engage with all and keep our direction of travel towards progress.
Yeah, but that kind of compromise is very mature way of looking at things. And you were talking about the genesis of the market. I tend to always refer to the carbon markets in their adolescence right now. It's been around for over probably 2 decades, right? Depending on where you kind of make the start point. But essentially, markets evolve and they mature over time. And folks who've been in and around markets and different asset classes understand that it's the destination that's the important component. And for us, it's shared belief in that we have to do this at scale to avoid reduce, and remove CO2 and their equivalencies at scale. We're talking gigatons.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And just to comment briefly on the removal part, you need the 1,000-year plus, quote unquote, permanent.
Of course.
But you also need the 100-year plus big
Sure.
solutions, because those are extremely useful during the century or even beyond, because they'll have to work together with all the other parts of the market.
Yeah, and this is fascinating. So thanks for unpacking that with me. That's great.